What if I told you that the most powerful man in Silicon Valley stood completely still at his own birthday party, refusing every invitation to dance, until a waitress carrying a tray of champagne glasses walked through the doors and changed his life forever? This isn't just another rags-to-riches story. This is about how one moment of unexpected connection can shatter years of carefully built walls and transform not just one life, but an entire community. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers of the Meridian Club cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as 300 of California's most influential people celebrated what should have been the happiest night of Marcus Sterling's life. At 42 years old, the founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics had just closed the largest tech acquisition in Silicon Valley history, a $12 billion deal that had taken him from successful entrepreneur to genuine titan of industry. Yet, as he stood rigid beside the grand piano, his hands clasped behind his back, Marcus looked more like a man attending his own funeral than his birthday celebration. The irony wasn't lost on him that in a ballroom filled with professional dancers hired for the evening, venture capitalists who waltzed through million-dollar deals daily, and socialites who moved through life as if choreographed, he was the only person refusing to move to the music. The string quartet played Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, the same piece that had opened every Sterling family celebration for as long as Marcus could remember. His late father, William Sterling, had insisted on tradition, and even now, 5 years after his death, Marcus felt bound by those expectations. "Marcus, darling, you simply must join us," called Patricia Hawthorne, the 60-year-old socialite who had appointed herself the unofficial queen of Silicon Valley society. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she glided toward him, her sequined gown trailing behind her like liquid silver. "The mayor's wife has been asking for a dance all evening, and frankly, you're being terribly rude to your guests." Marcus managed a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm perfectly content observing, Patricia. Everyone seems to be enjoying themselves without my participation." This wasn't entirely true. Throughout the evening, a parade of the West Coast's most eligible women had approached him, each hoping to be the one to finally crack the shell of the notoriously private billionaire. There was Amanda Richardson, the Stanford MBA who had built 3 successful startups before 30. Jennifer Carlisle, the tech journalist whose investigative pieces could make or break careers in Silicon Valley. Even Rebecca Santos, the venture capitalist who had turned down his first funding request 15 years ago and had been trying to make amends ever since. Each invitation had been declined with the same courteous but firm response: "Thank you, but I'm not dancing tonight." What none of them knew, what Marcus would never admit to anyone in this room, was that he hadn't danced since the night everything fell apart 3 years ago. The memory hit him like a physical blow, as it always did when his guard was down. Caroline. His wife of 8 years, his college sweetheart, the one person who had seen past the Sterling fortune and fallen in love with the awkward computer science major who spent more time with algorithms than people. She had loved these parties, loved the way they could escape into music together, her auburn hair spinning around her shoulders as they moved across whatever dance floor they found themselves on. The last time he had danced was at their anniversary party, just 6 weeks before the accident. Caroline had worn an emerald green dress that complimented her eyes, and they had slow danced to "The Way You Look Tonight," while their friends and family watched with the kind of affection reserved for couples who seemed to have figured out the secret to lasting happiness. 3 weeks later, she was gone, taken by a drunk driver on a rainy Tuesday evening as she drove home from her art studio. Marcus forced himself back to the present, back to the careful choreography of small talk and business networking that had become his life. The party was being held at the Meridian Club, the exclusive private club perched on the hills of Palo Alto, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the San Francisco Bay. The venue had been Patricia's suggestion, of course. "Darling, for a man of your stature, only the Meridian will do," she had insisted, and Marcus had agreed mainly because he couldn't summon the energy to care about the details. The guest list read like a who's who of West Coast power brokers. Tech executives whose companies had shaped the digital revolution, politicians who courted Silicon Valley's favor and funding, celebrities who had parlayed their fame into successful business ventures. They moved through the ballroom with practiced ease, conversations flowing seamlessly from IPO strategies to vacation homes in the Hamptons, from the latest biotech breakthroughs to their children's acceptances at Ivy League schools. Marcus had built his empire on the principle of connection. His company's revolutionary networking software had transformed how businesses communicated globally. Yet here he stood, surrounded by hundreds of people and feeling more isolated than he had in his cramped MIT dorm room 20 years ago. The success that everyone was celebrating tonight felt hollow, mechanical, like a computer program running efficiently but without soul. "Sir, would you like another scotch?" The question came from David Shen, one of the evening's hired servers, a young man whose polite professionalism reminded Marcus of his own early days in the corporate world. "Thank you, David. Actually, make it a double." Marcus accepted the crystal tumbler, noting how the server's eyes briefly widened at the request. It wasn't like him to drink heavily at business functions, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of everyone's expectations, combined with the forced celebration of achievements that felt increasingly meaningless, was becoming unbearable. As David disappeared back into the crowd, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the ballroom's ornate mirrors. He looked successful, certainly. The custom-tailored Armani tuxedo fit perfectly across his still athletic frame. His dark hair was expertly styled, and years of California sun had given him the kind of tan that spoke of weekend sailing trips and golf club memberships. But his gray eyes, the feature that business magazines always described as penetratingly intelligent, looked tired tonight. They held the kind of weariness that no amount of success could cure. The string quartet transitioned into a waltz, and the dance floor filled with couples moving in elegant synchronization. Marcus watched them with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying human behavior. There was something almost mechanical about their movements, he thought. Beautiful, certainly, but lacking the spontaneous joy that should accompany music and movement. "You know, your father would have been proud tonight," said a familiar voice beside him. Marcus turned to see Harold Brennan, his father's former business partner, and the closest thing to family Marcus had left. At 75, Harold moved with the careful dignity of a man who had spent decades navigating the highest levels of American business. "Would he?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Sometimes I wonder if he would recognize what Sterling Dynamics has become. We're so far from the small software company he and you started in that garage in Menlo Park." Harold chuckled, a warm sound that carried decades of shared history. "Your father dreamed big, Marcus, but I don't think even he imagined $12 billion big. What he would have recognized, what he would have been proud of, is your integrity. You've never forgotten where you came from, never compromised your values for profit. That's rarer than you might think in our world." The words should have been comforting, but Marcus felt only a familiar emptiness. Integrity was easy when you had enough money to make choices based on principle rather than necessity. He thought about the dozens of smaller companies he had acquired over the years, always ensuring fair compensation for employees, always maintaining the innovative cultures that had made those companies valuable in the first place. It was good business, certainly, but was it enough? Was building a more ethical version of corporate America really the legacy he wanted to leave? "I should circulate," Marcus said finally, recognizing the expectation in Harold's eyes. "Patricia will never forgive me if I spend the entire evening brooding in the corner." As he moved through the crowd, Marcus fell into the familiar rhythm of networking small talk. He discussed market trends with venture capitalists, shared insights about emerging technologies with fellow CEOs, and listened politely as politicians outlined their latest initiatives to support innovation in California. The conversations flowed with practiced ease, each participant playing their role in the elaborate social dance that governed Silicon Valley's elite circles. Yet beneath the surface pleasantries, Marcus detected something else, a hunger that went beyond simple ambition. These people, himself included, had achieved more success than previous generations could have imagined, yet none of them seemed particularly happy. They spoke of their accomplishments with pride, certainly, but there was a restlessness in their eyes, a constant searching for the next deal, the next acquisition, the next milestone that might finally provide the satisfaction that had somehow eluded them, despite their extraordinary achievements. The evening progressed with choreographed precision. Dinner was served at precisely 8 o'clock. A 7-course menu prepared by a James Beard award-winning chef, paired with wines that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a month. Speeches were given, toasting Marcus's business acumen and philanthropic efforts. The mayor of Palo Alto presented him with the key to the city, a gesture that felt both honorary and somehow meaningless. Through it all, Marcus maintained his role as the gracious host, accepting congratulations with appropriate humility, engaging in conversations about everything from artificial intelligence to sustainable energy. But part of his mind remained detached, observing the evening as if watching a performance in which he happened to be playing the lead role. It was during the dessert course that Patricia made her most determined attempt to draw him onto the dance floor. "Marcus, I simply insist," she declared, rising from her seat with the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "The photographer from Silicon Valley Business Journal is here, and honestly, what kind of story can he write about a birthday party where the guest of honor refuses to celebrate?" The logic was unassailable from a public relations standpoint, Marcus realized. His carefully cultivated image as Silicon Valley's most eligible bachelor would suffer if word spread that he had spent his own party standing around like a statue. Yet the thought of performing joy he didn't feel, of moving through the motions of celebration while his heart remained locked away, felt like a betrayal of something fundamental. "Perhaps later, Patricia," he replied, knowing that later would never come. As the evening approached its 10th hour, Marcus found himself questioning every choice that had led him to this moment. The success, the wealth, the influence, all of it felt like elaborate costume jewelry, impressive from a distance, but ultimately hollow upon closer inspection. He had built an empire, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of why that empire mattered, beyond the numbers on his quarterly reports. The string quartet began their final set of the evening, a collection of contemporary pieces arranged for classical instruments. Marcus recognized several of the songs. They were the kind of popular ballads that wedding DJs played during slow dances, designed to bring couples closer together on the dance floor. Around him, the few remaining couples swayed gently to the music, lost in their own private moments amid the public celebration. For the first time all evening, Marcus felt a stab of genuine envy, not for their wealth or status. He had more of both than anyone in the room, but for their ability to lose themselves in simple human connection. When had he forgotten how to do that? When had every interaction become a calculated exchange of information and influence, rather than a genuine moment between two people? The answer, he knew, was 3 years ago on a rainy Tuesday evening, when Caroline's car had been struck by a driver who had consumed too much alcohol at his own celebration. Since then, Marcus had retreated behind walls of professional achievement and social obligation, telling himself that work was enough, that success was its own reward, that the hole in his life could be filled with quarterly profits and industry recognition. Tonight, surrounded by 300 people who knew his net worth but not his heart, Marcus Sterling finally admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for 3 years. He was profoundly, overwhelmingly alone, and no amount of money or power or technological innovation could solve that particular problem. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, as he stood in his perfectly appointed celebration surrounded by the fruits of his extraordinary success, Marcus felt something unexpected. The first stirring of curiosity about what might come next. Not the next acquisition or product launch or charitable initiative, but the next chapter of a life that had somehow become all achievement and no meaning. He had no idea that the answer to that question was about to walk through the service entrance carrying a tray of champagne glasses, her presence destined to shatter the careful equilibrium he had maintained for 3 years and show him a path back to the person he had forgotten he could be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign that something had shifted in the carefully orchestrated evening came not from the main ballroom, but from the kitchen corridors beyond the service doors. Marcus noticed it initially as a subtle change in the rhythm of the staff. Servers who had been moving with clockwork precision throughout the night suddenly seemed flustered, clustering in small groups near the service entrance and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Marcus had always been observant of details that others missed, a skill that had served him well in business negotiations and technology development. Tonight, that same attention to nuance picked up on the disruption rippling through the Meridian Club's usually flawless service operation. David Chen, the server who had been attending to Marcus throughout the evening, appeared at his elbow looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Sterling, I apologize for the interruption, but we're experiencing a small staffing situation, David said, his professional composure slipping slightly. One of our senior servers called in sick at the last minute and we're short-handed for the evening cleanup. The club manager is, well, he's handling it. Before Marcus could respond, the commotion David was diplomatically describing erupted into view. Through the partially open service doors, Marcus caught sight of a heated exchange between Gerald Morrison, the Meridian Club's notoriously particular manager, and someone Marcus couldn't quite see. Morrison's face was flushed with the kind of righteous indignation he typically reserved for members who violated the club's strict dress code. "This is completely unacceptable," Morrison was saying, his voice carrying across the ballroom despite his obvious attempt to keep the conversation quiet. "We have procedures, protocols. You can't simply walk in here without proper clearance and expect to work one of our most important events." The response came in a voice that was steady, professional, but with an underlying steel that suggested its owner was not easily intimidated. "Mr. Morrison, I've worked every major event at the Fairmont, the St. Regis, and the Four Seasons over the past 5 years. I have my food service certification. My background check is current. And right now you're 20 minutes behind schedule for table clearing because you're short-staffed. Either let me help or explain to the Sterling party why their guests are sitting with dirty plates." Marcus found himself intrigued despite the disruption. In his experience, most people dealing with authority figures like Morrison either became obsequious or aggressive. This person, he still couldn't see who was speaking, had managed to be both respectful and assertive, acknowledging Morrison's position while making it clear they wouldn't be dismissed without good reason. Patricia Hawthorne materialized beside Marcus with the supernatural ability she possessed for sensing drama at social gatherings. "What on earth is all that commotion about?" she asked, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured toward the service area. "Really, Gerald should know better than to allow staff disputes to spill over into the main event. I'll have a word with him about this." "No," Marcus said quickly, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Let me handle it." Something about the situation had captured his attention in a way that nothing else had all evening. Perhaps it was the break in the monotonous rhythm of small talk and networking. Or maybe it was genuine curiosity about someone bold enough to challenge Morrison's authority. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself moving toward the service area with more purpose than he had shown all night. As he approached, the source of the voice became visible. A woman in her early 30s stood facing Morrison, her posture confident, despite the obvious tension of the situation. She wore the standard black and white uniform of professional catering staff. But something about the way she carried herself suggested this was temporary attire rather than a reflection of her usual circumstances. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held an intelligence and determination that commanded attention. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the conversation. Morrison's demeanor changed instantly, the officious club manager transforming into the obsequious service professional he became whenever faced with the club's most influential members. "Mr. Sterling, please accept my apologies for this disruption. We're simply dealing with an unauthorized personnel situation. Nothing that should concern you on your special evening." The woman turned to face Marcus, and he found himself struck by her direct gaze. There was no deference in her expression, no obvious recognition of his status or wealth. Instead, she looked at him with the same professional assessment she might give any potential client or business partner. "I'm Sofia Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to introducing herself in professional settings. "I run Rodriguez Catering Services, and I was called in tonight to help with your event. There seems to be some confusion about my credentials." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the small calluses that spoke of someone who worked with her hands. "Called in by whom?" "Actually, by me," David Chen interjected, appearing beside them with obvious relief at Marcus's intervention. "My sister Maria works for Ms. Rodriguez's company. When I realized how badly we were understaffed tonight, I contacted her. Sophia came in on her own time to help ensure your event runs smoothly." Morrison's face grew even redder. Mr. Chen exceeded his authority by making that call. "We have very strict protocols about outside contractors, especially for events of this caliber. The insurance liability alone could be resolved with a 5-minute phone call to your club's legal department." Sophia interrupted calmly. "I carry full commercial liability insurance, my staff certifications are current, and I've worked events much larger than this. The question isn't whether I'm qualified to help, it's whether you want your guests to have a positive experience or whether you'd prefer to maintain bureaucratic purity while your service standards suffer." Marcus found himself fascinated by the exchange. In his world, most people either immediately deferred to his authority or attempted to impress him with their own credentials and connections. Sophia Rodriguez was doing neither. She was simply making her case based on practical merit, treating the situation as a business problem to be solved rather than a social dynamic to be navigated. "What exactly do you need?" Marcus asked, directing the question to Sophia rather than Morrison. "Honestly? About 2 hours of efficient table service and cleanup coordination. Your guests are finishing dinner, and the current staff is falling behind on clearing and resetting for the evening's final phase. I can have this handled smoothly and invisibly, or Mr. Morrison can continue explaining why proper procedures are more important than proper service." The logic was unassailable, and Marcus made his decision with the same decisiveness that had built his business empire. "Mr. Morrison, Ms. Rodriguez is my guest for the evening. Whatever paperwork needs to be completed can be handled tomorrow. David, please make sure Ms. Rodriguez has everything she needs." Morrison's expression suggested he had just swallowed something unpleasant, but years of serving the Meridian Club's wealthy membership had taught him when to retreat. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, as you wish." As Morrison retreated with wounded dignity, Sophia turned to Marcus with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Thank you. I don't usually need rescue from club managers, but Gerald Morrison has a reputation for being particular." "You know his reputation." "I know every event manager, club supervisor, and catering director between San Francisco and San Jose," Sophia replied matter-of-factly. "It's my business to know who I'm working with. Morrison runs a tight ship, but he sometimes confuses process with results." Marcus found himself genuinely curious about this woman who spoke with such confidence about an industry he knew little about, despite hosting dozens of events over the years. "How long have you been in the catering business?" "Officially, 5 years. Unofficially, I've been managing events since I was 16 and helping my mother coordinate quinceañeras and wedding receptions in our neighborhood." Sophia began moving toward the serving area as she spoke, her attention already shifting to the logistics of the evening. "Excuse me, but I should really get started if you want this evening to end on schedule." "Of course," Marcus said, but found himself reluctant to return to the ballroom. There was something refreshing about Sophia's direct, practical approach to problem-solving. No hidden agendas. No attempts to leverage their brief interaction into future networking opportunities. Just a professional focused on doing excellent work. He watched as Sophia quickly assessed the kitchen situation, speaking with the existing staff in fluent Spanish and English, organizing the cleanup operation with the efficiency of someone who had managed much more complex logistics. Within minutes, the service had returned to its earlier smooth rhythm, dirty plates disappearing and fresh champagne glasses appearing as if by magic. "Impressive," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find Harold Brennan observing the same scene. "Your father always said you could judge a person's character by watching how they handled unexpected problems. That young woman just turned a potential disaster into seamless execution." Marcus nodded, still watching Sophia coordinate with the kitchen staff. "She runs her own company, apparently, Rodriguez Catering Services." "Smart," Harold observed. "In my experience, the people who build successful service businesses understand something fundamental about creating value. They know that reputation is everything, and reputation is built one satisfied customer at a time." As if summoned by their conversation, Sophia appeared beside them carrying a tray of perfectly arranged champagne flutes. "Gentlemen, the kitchen manager asked me to bring these out personally. Apparently there is special vintage being served only to VIP guests." She offered the tray with the same professional grace Marcus had observed throughout the evening, but as he reached for a glass, their eyes met briefly. For just a moment, the careful professional mask slipped, and Marcus caught a glimpse of someone who was genuinely enjoying the challenge of the work, finding satisfaction in executing complex logistics flawlessly. "Thank you," Marcus said, and meant it in a way that went beyond polite social convention. "My pleasure, Mr. Sterling. I hope you're enjoying your birthday celebration." There was something in the way she said it, Not the practiced deference of hired staff, but the genuine warmth of someone who understood that birthdays should be meaningful occasions. It struck Marcus that Sofia Rodriguez was the first person all evening to wish him happy birthday, as if she actually meant it, rather than as a social obligation. As she moved away to serve other guests, Marcus realized that for the first time all evening he was paying attention to something other than his own discomfort. The efficient way Sofia organized her work, the respect she showed to the existing staff while clearly taking charge, the complete absence of any attempt to use their brief interaction for personal gain, it all spoke to a type of character he rarely encountered in his usual social circles. "You're staring," Harold observed with amusement. "I'm observing," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." "If you say so. Though I should point out that Patricia Hawthorne has been watching you watch the catering staff. And she has that look she gets when she's planning social interventions." Marcus glanced across the ballroom to see Patricia approaching with the determined stride of someone on a mission. Behind her walked Jennifer Carlisle, the tech journalist who had been trying to engage Marcus in conversation throughout the evening. "Marcus, darling," Patricia called out as she approached. "Jennifer has been telling me about her latest article on sustainable business practices. I thought, you two simply must have a proper conversation about your environmental initiatives." It was, Marcus realized, Patricia's latest attempt to orchestrate a connection between him and one of the evening's eligible women. Jennifer was certainly attractive, intelligent, and successful. Exactly the type of person his social circle expected him to eventually marry. Yet as he looked at her approaching smile, Marcus felt only the familiar weight of obligation and performance that had characterized his entire evening. "Of course," Marcus replied with practiced politeness. "Though I should warn you, Jennifer, that sustainable business practices make for rather dry conversation at birthday parties." "Not if you're passionate about the subject," Jennifer replied with the confidence of someone accustomed to steering conversations toward her professional interests. "And from what I've researched about Sterling Dynamics, environmental responsibility seems to be more than just corporate PR for you." As Jennifer launched into her questions about carbon footprint reduction and green technology investments, Marcus found his attention divided. Part of him engaged with her intelligent analysis of corporate environmental responsibility, but another part of his mind kept tracking Sofia Rodriguez as she moved efficiently through the ballroom, managing the evening's logistics with understated competence. The contrast was striking. Jennifer spoke about environmental impact with the authority of someone who had studied the subject extensively and written about it professionally. Sofia simply did the work of ensuring that an elaborate social event proceeded without waste or inefficiency. Both approaches had value, but Marcus found himself more drawn to Sofia's practical application than Jennifer's theoretical analysis. "Don't you think?" Jennifer asked, and Marcus realized he had missed part of her question. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was distracted by the excellent service tonight." Jennifer followed his gaze toward Sofia, who was at that moment coordinating with the kitchen staff to ensure that leftover food would be properly packaged rather than discarded. "Oh yes, the catering staff has been quite professional, though I heard there was some drama earlier with an unauthorized worker." "No drama," Marcus replied firmly. "Just someone committed to ensuring excellence." As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, Marcus found himself increasingly aware of the parallel conversations happening around him. The guests discussed quarterly earnings and stock options while Sofia quietly ensured that nothing was wasted and everyone was served with equal attention. His social circle debated the latest technological innovations while Sofia solved practical problems with efficiency and grace. By 11 o'clock, most of the guests had begun their farewells, and Marcus had fulfilled his obligations as host. He had accepted congratulations, made appropriate responses to birthday wishes, and maintained the social connections that were essential to his business relationships. Yet as he watched Sofia begin the process of breaking down the serving stations, Marcus realized that the most interesting person at his own birthday party was someone he had spoken with for less than 5 minutes. The thought should have been troubling. Instead, as Marcus Sterling stood in his perfectly appointed celebration surrounded by the fruits of his extraordinary success, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Genuine curiosity about another person, not their net worth or business connections or potential value to his company, but simply who they were and what drove them to pursue excellence in work that others might consider beneath notice. He had no idea that his curiosity was about to transform a simple business interaction into something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, connection, and what it meant to build a life worth living. The Meridian Club's grand ballroom had begun to empty as midnight approached, leaving behind the inevitable debris of a successful celebration. Empty champagne flutes catching the light from crystal chandeliers, abandoned dinner plates with artistic remnants of the evening's gourmet menu, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume and imported flowers. Most of Marcus's guests had departed with the usual round of air kisses and promises to schedule lunch meetings that might or might not actually happen. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of not wanting his own party to end. Not because he had enjoyed the forced socialization and networking conversations, but because he was fascinated by the transformation happening around him as Sofia Rodriguez orchestrated the breakdown of the evening's elaborate setup with the precision of a military operation. "Sophia," Marcus called out as she directed two servers in the proper way to pack the delicate crystal stemware. She looked up from her checklist, a strand of dark hair that had escaped her ponytail framing her face. "Yes, Mr. Sterling? Is there something else you need for the evening?" Marcus realized he didn't have a ready answer. What he needed was something he couldn't quite articulate. A reason to extend this conversation, to understand what drove this woman who had walked into his perfectly orchestrated world, and somehow made it more interesting simply by being competent and authentic. "Actually, I was wondering, would you join me for a drink? After you're finished, of course. It's been a long evening, and I'd like to thank you properly for stepping in tonight." Sophia paused in her work, studying his face with the same direct assessment she had given Morrison earlier. "Mr. Sterling, that's very kind, but I don't typically socialize with clients. It tends to complicate professional relationships." "What if I wasn't a client?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the question. "What if I was just someone who appreciated excellent work and wanted to have a conversation with an interesting person?" For the first time all evening, Sophia's professional composure wavered slightly. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not the practiced customer service smile Marcus was accustomed to receiving, but something genuine and slightly amused. "In that case," she said, "I suppose one drink wouldn't hurt. But I should warn you, I'm not very good at small talk with billionaires." "Good," Marcus replied. "I'm terrible at small talk with everyone." 30 minutes later, the ballroom had been restored to its usual pristine state under Sophia's efficient supervision. The remaining staff had been dismissed with generous tips that Sophia had quietly negotiated on their behalf, and the kitchen had been left spotless according to the Meridian Club's exacting standards. Marcus had watched the entire process with growing admiration for Sophia's ability to manage complex logistics while maintaining respect for every person involved in the operation. They sat now at a small table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of Silicon Valley spreading below them like a circuit board against the darkness. Marcus had opened a bottle of wine from the club's private reserve. Not the flashy vintage that had been served during dinner, but a smaller production Pinot Noir that he genuinely enjoyed rather than served to impress others. "So," Sophia said, accepting the glass he offered, "what does someone like you actually do for fun? And please don't say networking events or charity galas." Marcus laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "Honestly, I'm not sure I remember. Work has become pretty much everything since." He paused, unsure how much personal information to share with someone he had just met. "Since your wife died?" Sophia asked gently. "I'm sorry. David mentioned it earlier when he was explaining why tonight was important to you. He said you hadn't celebrated anything in years." The directness should have been jarring, but instead Marcus felt oddly relieved. Everyone in his social circle either avoided mentioning Caroline entirely or brought her up in hushed, reverent tones that made grief feel like a performance rather than a reality. 3 years ago, Marcus confirmed, Caroline loved these kinds of events. She had this way of making even the most formal gathering feel like an adventure. "I haven't quite figured out how to enjoy them without her." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you grow around, like a tree growing around a fence. The fence doesn't disappear, but eventually the tree becomes bigger than the obstacle." "That's actually helpful," Marcus said, realizing he meant it. "Most people either try to cheer me up or tell me I need to move on. Your grandmother sounds wise." She was. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Taught me that life doesn't pause for tragedy, but it also doesn't have to pretend tragedy didn't happen. Marcus studied Sophia's face in the soft light from the windows. There was a strength there that went beyond professional competence. The kind of resilience that came from facing real adversity and choosing to build something meaningful from the experience. Is that how you ended up in catering, following your grandmother's wisdom about growing around obstacles? Sophia's smile was tinged with memory. Partly, my grandmother was the unofficial event coordinator for our entire neighborhood. Weddings, quinceañeras, funeral receptions. She somehow managed to feed hundreds of people with what seemed like magic but was actually just incredible organization and planning. I started helping her when I was 14, and I discovered I loved the challenge of creating perfect experiences for people's most important moments. And now you run your own company. 5 years and counting. We specialize in events where the service matters more than the show. Small weddings where every detail counts. Corporate retreats where the food brings people together. Memorial services where dignity is more important than extravagance. Marcus found himself leaning forward, genuinely engaged in a way he hadn't been with anyone in months. That's a very different approach from most catering companies I've worked with. They usually lead with their celebrity client list or their signature presentations. Those companies serve a market that values status symbols, Sophia replied. I serve people who value authentic experiences. The profit margins are smaller, but the satisfaction is much higher. As they talked, Marcus became aware of something extraordinary happening. For the first time in 3 years, he was having a conversation that wasn't about business strategy, technological innovation, or social obligations. Sophia asked him about his interests outside of work, his thoughts on subjects that had nothing to do with Sterling Dynamics, his opinions on books and music and travel destinations he might visit for pleasure rather than business development. More surprisingly, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about her answers to the same questions. Sophia had traveled extensively, but always for work, managing destination weddings in Napa Valley, corporate retreats in Big Sur, anniversary celebrations in Carmel. She read voraciously, favoring authors who wrote about resilience and human connection. She loved jazz music, but had never been to a live performance because she was usually working when concerts happened. That's criminal, Marcus said when she mentioned the jazz concert situation. There's a club in San Francisco, Yoshi's, where some of the best musicians in the world perform regularly. You should go. Should I? Sophia asked with amusement. And when exactly would I find the time? My weekends are booked solid through October, and weeknight events usually run until midnight. Marcus paused, considering. What if someone were to, hypothetically, ensure that you had an evening off? Perhaps by booking your services for a private event that turned out to be attending a jazz performance? Sophia laughed, a warm sound that transformed her entire face. That would be either very creative or completely crazy. In my experience, the best business decisions are both. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of the club's closing announcement. Marcus glanced at his watch, startled to discover it was nearly 2 a.m. They had been talking for over 2 hours, and it felt like minutes. I should go, Sophia said, beginning to gather her belongings. Early day tomorrow, a wedding reception for 200 people in Menlo Park. Marcus felt an unexpected reluctance to end the evening. Sophia, I have a confession to make. She paused, looking at him with curiosity. I lied earlier when I said I don't dance. The truth is I haven't danced since Caroline died, but it's not because I forgot how. Marcus stood up, extending his hand with a gesture that felt both terrifying and completely natural. Would you dance with me? Just once? Before the evening ends? Sophia looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. There's no music. There's always music, Marcus replied. Sometimes you just have to listen for it. As if summoned by his words, the club's sound system began playing a soft jazz standard, apparently the cleaning crew's preference for late-night work. Sophia smiled and placed her hand in his. They moved together slowly on the empty dance floor, surrounded by the detritus of the evening's elaborate celebration. Marcus was struck by how natural it felt to hold Sophia, how her movements complemented his without the careful choreography that characterized most of his social interactions. This wasn't the performative dancing of charity galas or networking events. It was simply two people finding rhythm together. Thank you, Sophia said softly as they swayed to the music. For what? For reminding me that sometimes the best part of an evening happens after all the guests go home. Marcus looked down at her, struck by the realization that this was the first time in 3 years that he had felt genuinely happy rather than merely satisfied with his circumstances. Sofia Rodriguez had walked into his perfectly controlled world and, without trying, had shown him what he had been missing. "Sofia," he said, making a decision with the same intuitive certainty that had guided his most successful business ventures, "I'd like to see you again. Not for catering services, not for business networking, just to see you." She met his gaze directly, and Marcus saw his own hope reflected in her dark eyes. "I'd like that too, Marcus. Though I should warn you, my life is considerably less glamorous than billionaire birthday parties." "Good," Marcus replied, spinning her gently as the music continued. "I've had enough glamour to last a lifetime. What I need is something real." As they danced in the empty ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of an evening that had started as an obligation and ended as a revelation, Marcus Sterling finally understood what his father and Harold Brennan had been trying to tell him for years. Success wasn't measured in acquisition deals, or technological innovations, or social connections. It was measured in moments of genuine human connection, in finding someone who saw past your achievements to the person you were capable of becoming. 6 months later, Sterling Dynamics announced the launch of its Small Business Innovation Initiative, a program designed to provide technology resources and business mentorship to entrepreneurs in the service industry. The initiative's first grant recipient was Rodriguez Catering Services, which used the funding to expand into sustainable event management and fair wage employment practices. And if the tech industry's most eligible bachelor was frequently seen at jazz clubs, neighborhood restaurants, and small business conferences instead of charity galas and networking events, Silicon Valley's elite eventually learned to accept that Marcus Sterling had discovered something more valuable than any acquisition deal, a partner who challenged him to build a life worth living rather than simply a fortune worth inheriting. The night Marcus Sterling finally learned that the most important connections couldn't be programmed, purchased, or performed, they could only be danced into existence, one authentic moment at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.